You know that feeling when you're genuinely excited about something, but there's this one person who you just know is going to try and ruin it? Yeah, that's pretty much my life whenever my sister-in-law Kaya is involved. My name is Sierra, and my brother Brody married Kaya about 5 years ago. I love Brody. He's my big brother, always been a bit of a goofball but with a good heart. Kaya, though, Kaya is a different story. From day one, she's treated me like something she scraped off the bottom of her ridiculously expensive designer shoe. I remember when Brody first brought her over to my apartment. It's not huge, but it's cozy, clean, and mine. I work hard as a project manager, and I'm proud of what I've built for myself. Kaya walked in, her eyes doing a slow, dismissive sweep. "Oh," she'd said, her voice dripping with that fake politeness she uses when she's about to be insulting. "It's quaint. Does your company not offer, like, housing stipends for something a bit more central?" I just smiled and said, "I like my neighborhood, Kaya, and my commute is great." Brody had coughed awkwardly. That way he does when he knows Kaya's being awful but doesn't want to start a fight. That's Kaya in a nutshell. Everything is about appearances, about money, about status. And most of it isn't even her money. Her father, Vince, owns a string of successful car dealerships, and he's always bankrolled Kaya's lavish lifestyle. Her clothes are designer, her car is top of the line, and her opinions on anyone who doesn't live up to her standards are loudly and frequently expressed. She once told me my 10-year-old perfectly reliable sedan was brave. Brave? Who says that? Another time at a family dinner, she'd asked very loudly if my little job allowed for actual vacation time or just, like, long weekends. Brody had choked on his water then, and even my mom, Anna, had shot Kaya a look. But Kaya just smiled, completely oblivious. Or more likely, not caring. She seems to think that because I don't flaunt wealth, I must not have any, or that my choices are somehow inferior to her debt-fueled extravagances. So when Brody and Kaya announced they were expecting, my first thought, after the initial joy for Brody, was, "Oh boy, here we go." A baby shower hosted by Kaya was bound to be an exercise in competitive gifting and one-upmanship. But despite my reservations about Kaya, I was genuinely, overwhelmingly thrilled about becoming an aunt. A niece. I'd already pictured reading her stories, taking her to the park, teaching her how to bake my mom's famous cookies, being that cool aunt who slips her a 20 when her parents aren't looking. This baby, this innocent little girl, deserved all the love in the world, and I was determined to give her my share. Kaya's attitude be damned. She was family, my brother's daughter, and that meant everything to me. That's why I put so much thought into her gift. I could have bought some expensive baby gadget or a designer outfit, something Kaya would approve of for its label. But I wanted to give something lasting, something meaningful, something that truly said, "I love you, and I'm here for you." I'm pretty good with my finances. Always have been. So I decided to set up a trust fund for my niece. I started it with a significant deposit, $25,000 to be exact, enough to give her a real head start in life, whether for education, a down payment on a home someday, or just a safety net. It wasn't about flashing cash. It was about her future, about providing a foundation that no one could take away from her. I printed out the confirmation of the initial deposit and a brief heartfelt letter to my future niece, explaining what the fund was for and how much I already loved her. I put these into a simple, plain white envelope. My plan was to give it to them quietly, maybe explain the details to Brody later, so he and Kaya understood its significance. I wasn't going to make a big show of it at the shower. That's not my style. And honestly, I didn't want to give Kaya any ammunition to twist it into something ostentatious on my part, or worse, for her to somehow feel entitled to control it. The day of the baby shower arrived, a sunny Saturday. Kaya had, of course, booked the fanciest brunch spot in town, the kind with valet parking and tiny, artfully arranged food that costs a fortune. As I pulled up, I saw the parade of luxury cars already lining the street. I took a deep breath, smoothing down my dress. Nice, but definitely not couture. I was bracing myself for the subtle digs, the condescending smiles, the whole Kaya experience. I just hoped I could get through it without losing my cool. For Brody's sake, and for the sake of the little girl I was already so excited to meet. I walked in, the scent of expensive flowers and even more expensive perfume hitting me like a wave. The room was a sea of pastel pink and gold, every detail screaming luxury. And there, on a massive, ornately decorated table, was the mountain of gifts, huge boxes wrapped in shimmering paper, tied with silk ribbons, all from brands I recognized from glossy magazines. I clutched the plain white envelope in my hand, a stark contrast to the opulence surrounding it. Little did I know, this simple paper was about to ignite a firestorm. The air buzzed with forced laughter and the clinking of champagne flutes. Mimosas, actually, because, baby shower. Kaya was holding court on a plush velvet armchair that looked suspiciously like a throne, surrounded by a gaggle of women who all seemed to have the same blow-dried hair and aggressively white teeth. I recognized one of them, Brinley, as one of Kaya's oldest and loudest friends. Brinley was currently exclaiming over the miniature Gucci diaper bag someone had just presented. "Oh, Kaya, it's divine. Baby will be the most stylish infant in the entire state," Kaya beamed. "Only the best for my little princess, of course." She caught my eye then. A flicker of something. Was it triumph? Or just her usual condescension? Before turning back to her adoring audience. I found a relatively quiet corner, nursing a glass of orange juice, feeling like an anthropologist observing a strange alien ritual. Brody was flitting around, looking stressed, but trying to play the gracious host, occasionally catching my eye and offering a weak, apologetic smile. Poor Brody. He was so clearly out of his depth. After what felt like an eternity of small talk about nursery color palettes and designer strollers, Kaya clapped her hands together. "All right, everyone. Present time." Her voice cut through the chatter, and a hush fell over the room. This was clearly the main event. The mountain of gifts was systematically brought to her, one by one. Kaya would ooh and ah with practiced enthusiasm. "Oh, a cashmere baby blanket. It's heavenly." "A sterling silver rattle? How chic." Each expensive item was met with performative gasps and declarations of its absolute necessity. Her friends lapped it up, preening when their gift received particularly high praise. I watched, my simple white envelope feeling smaller and more insignificant by the second. I told myself it didn't matter what Kaya thought. This gift wasn't for her. It was for my niece. Finally, after a parade of designer onesies, impossibly tiny shoes, and gadgets I couldn't even identify, it was my turn. Most of the other gifts had been presented. I walked over, the eyes of Kaya's friends following me. I could feel their judgment, their silent assessment of my less-than-designer dress, my simple hairstyle. "This is from me, Kaya," I said, trying to keep my voice steady as I handed her the envelope. "For the baby." She took it, her perfectly manicured fingers barely brushing mine. She glanced at the plain white rectangle in her hand, a slight frown creasing her brow. There was no fancy card attached, no ribbon, no gift bag. Just the envelope. Her eyes flicked up to mine, a smirk playing on her lips. Then, with a theatrical sigh that seemed to suck all the air out of the room, she did it. She casually, disdainfully, tossed the envelope into a large, ornate waste bin next to her chair, already overflowing with discarded wrapping paper and ribbons. It landed with a soft, almost inaudible thud on a pile of crumpled tissue. A few of Kaya's friends tittered. Brinley let out a snort. "Honestly," Kaya announced, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear, her gaze sweeping over her guests before landing squarely on me. Some people just shouldn't bother coming if they can't afford a decent present. I mean, really? An empty envelope? Her tone was mocking, dripping with disdain. It's just embarrassing for everyone. More snickers rippled through the room. My face burned. I could feel the heat rising up my neck, the sting of humiliation sharp and sudden. I looked at Brody. He was staring at his shoes, his jaw tight, a muscle twitching in his cheek. He looked up, met my eyes for a split second, then looked away again. He said nothing. Not a word to defend me. Not a word to question Kaya. Nothing. My blood ran cold, then hot with a shame so intense it almost buckled my knees. I wanted the ground to swallow me whole. But as I met Kaya's smug, triumphant gaze, something inside me snapped. The shame didn't disappear, but it was joined by a different kind of fire, a cold, hard anger that settled deep in my bones. I wouldn't cry. I wouldn't scream. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction. I managed a tight, almost brittle smile. "You're probably right, Kaya," I said softly, my voice surprisingly even. Then I turned, my back straight, and walked out of that suffocating room, leaving the stunned silence, her fading, mocking laughter, and the shocked faces of some of the other guests behind. She had no idea what she'd just thrown away. The click of my heels on the polished floor of the restaurant lobby sounded unnaturally loud as I made my escape. I didn't look back. Once outside, the bright sunlight felt like a slap in the face after the dim, perfumed air of Kaya's party. I fumbled for my keys, my hands shaking slightly, not with fear, but with a potent cocktail of anger and adrenaline. I got into my brave little car, slammed the door, and just sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, taking deep, shuddering breaths. The first person I called was Hazel. She's my best friend, my rock, the one person who knows every ridiculous Kaya story and has offered to accidentally spill red wine on her more than once. "Hazel, you will not believe what just happened," I said, my voice still tight. "Oh no, what did the Queen of Mean do now?" Hazel's voice was instantly alert. "Did she critique your shoes? Complain about the lack of a gluten-free, vegan, air-purified option for her unborn child?" I managed a weak laugh. "Worse. Much, much worse." I recounted the whole scene. The envelope, the toss, Kaya's cruel words, the laughter, Brody's silence. Hazel was silent for a moment, and when she spoke, her voice was dangerously calm. "She threw it in the trash? In front of everyone? Sierra, I am going to—" "Don't," I interrupted, though a tiny part of me appreciated her murderous loyalty. "It's done. But Hazel, she has no idea what was in that envelope." "What do you mean? Was it a glitter bomb? Please tell me it was a glitter bomb that activates upon contact with discarded wrapping paper." "Even better," I said, a grim satisfaction starting to bubble up. "It was a letter to my niece, and proof of a $25,000 seed deposit into a trust fund I set up for her." Hazel gasped. "25,000? Sierra? And she just chucked it?" "Like it was yesterday's garbage," I confirmed. "But here's the kicker, Hayes. I set it up carefully. I'm a co-trustee. Any major non-educational withdrawals or significant changes to the fund require my signature, my consent, until my niece turns 21. "No way," Hazel crowed. "So Kaya can't just drain it for a new Birkin bag?" "Exactly," I said. "This was meant to be for my niece. Truly, for her, not for Kaya's shopping sprees." I was going to explain it all to Brody later quietly. I didn't want a big fuss. "Well, you got a big fuss anyway. Just not the one you planned," Hazel said dryly. "So, what now? Are you going to tell them?" "I don't know," I admitted. "Right now, I just needed to get out of there. I feel humiliated, angry, but also weirdly calm, like the calm before a storm." "You let that storm brew, honey. Hazel said. She deserves whatever's coming to her. And Brody? Shame on him for not standing up for you. She was right, of course. Brody's silence had cut almost as deep as Kaya's cruelty. I drove home, the anger slowly solidifying into a cold resolve. I wasn't going to let this go. Not this time. Kaya had crossed a line. A big, glaring, expensive line. A couple of hours later, my phone rang. Brody. I let it ring a few times before answering, schooling my voice into a neutral tone. Sierra? Hey. Where did you go? He asked, his voice hesitant, a little strained. I left the party, Brody, I said simply. Yeah, I noticed. Kaya was wondering, well, we were all wondering. Was everything okay? Was everything okay? Seriously? I took a slow breath. No, Brody. Everything was not okay. Your wife took the gift I brought for your daughter, a gift I put a lot of thought and love into, and she threw it in the trash in front of all her friends. Then she announced that I was too poor to buy a decent present. So no, not okay. Silence on his end. Then a flustered, thrown it away? Sierra, she wouldn't. Are you sure? She said it was just an empty card. She said you just handed her an empty envelope and walked out. The audacity. The sheer, unmitigated gall. I took another deep breath, keeping my voice level. Ask her to check the trash gifts more carefully, Brody. Especially the cheap white envelope. The one she found so embarrassing. I paused, then added, tell her to read what's inside. Both pages. Then I hung up. Let him figure it out. Let her figure it out. The ball was in their court now, or rather, in their trash can. The silence from Brody's end after I hung up was satisfying. I imagined the frantic, hushed conversation that was likely happening in their pristine beige living room. Kaya, indignant at first, insisting I was lying, that it was just an empty envelope. Brody, caught between his sister's calm certainty and his wife's histrionics, probably suggesting they just check the trash, just to be sure, just to prove me wrong. I made myself a cup of tea, the strong, bitter kind, and settled onto my sofa. I wasn't sure what to expect, or when, but I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that they would check. Kaya's greed, her insatiable need to quantify everything in monetary terms, would eventually outweigh her pride. The thought of potentially missing out on something, even something she'd already deemed worthless, would gnaw at her. It took about 3 hours. 3 hours of me replaying the scene at the shower in my head, each replay fueling the cold fire in my gut. Then my phone buzzed. Brody again. This time, I answered on the first ring. Sierra? His voice was completely different. Gone was the tentative, slightly annoyed tone from before. Now it was a bizarre mix of horror, disbelief, and something that sounded suspiciously like panic. Sierra, oh my God. Kaya. She found it. Found what, Brody? I asked, keeping my voice deliberately calm, almost detached. The envelope. In the trash. She opened it. She read the letter. And the other paper. He sounded like he could barely get the words out. The trust fund. $25,000? I could hear Kaya in the background. Not words, just a high-pitched, muffled wail. It was a sound I'd never heard from her before. Not the sound of anger or condescension, but of pure, unadulterated shock. Maybe even fear. Yes, Brody, I said. A significant gift, wouldn't you say? For my niece. I don't know what to say, Sierra. She's a mess. She had no idea. She just assumed. He trailed off, unable to articulate his wife's monumental blunder. She assumed it was cheap, I finished for him, because it came from me. And she said as much, very publicly. I know. And I am so sorry, Sierra. I should have said something. I froze. It was awful. What she said, what she did? Yes, it was, I agreed. No point in letting him off the hook entirely. The call with Brody ended with his stammered apologies and promises that Kaya would call me, that she was devastated by her terrible mistake. I just said, "We'll see," and hung up. It didn't take long. Less than 5 minutes later, my phone rang again. Kaya. Caller ID doesn't lie. I let it go to voicemail. I wasn't ready to talk to her. I wanted to hear what she'd say when she thought I wasn't listening. The voicemail notification popped up. I played it, a small, cruel smile touching my lips. Sierra. Oh, Sierra, darling. It's Kaya. Her voice was unrecognizable. Gone was the haughty, disdainful queen of the baby shower. In her place was a syrupy, cloyingly sweet, panicked stranger. Sweetheart, I am mortified. Absolutely beside myself. There's been the most dreadful misunderstanding. That envelope, I don't know what I was thinking. It was so crowded. So many gifts. I made a terrible, terrible mistake. A pause. A shaky inhale. Brody just showed me the letter and the fund. Sierra, it's the most incredibly generous, thoughtful gift I have ever seen. I am just speechless. We need to talk, please. As soon as possible. We can fix this. Please, please call me back, darling. I am so sorry. I listened to it again, just to savor the sheer desperation in her tone. The focus, of course, was entirely on the generous gift, the money. Not a single word about her public humiliation of me, her cruel words, the snickering friends. Just panic about the cash she'd literally thrown in the bin. My phone buzzed again. Another call from Kaya. I ignored it. Another voicemail followed. Same tone, same desperate pleas. Maybe even a few fake-sounding sniffles thrown in for good measure. Sierra, please. I feel just awful. This is all a huge mistake. That gift. It's just so incredibly generous. We can fix this. I deleted the voicemail without responding. Oh, we could fix this, Kaya. But not in the way you think. The game was just beginning. The calls and texts from Kaya continued relentlessly for the next 24 hours. Each voicemail was a masterclass in panicked insincerity, her voice dripping with a sweetness so artificial it made my teeth ache. Sierra, darling, I haven't slept a wink. I'm just sick about this. Sweetheart, please, just let me explain. It was the lighting. I couldn't see properly. That incredibly generous gift, Sierra. We need to celebrate it properly. I ignored every single one. My silence, I knew, would be far more unsettling to her than any angry outburst. Let her stew. Let her imagine all the scenarios. When her direct approach failed, she sicked Brody on me again. He called, sounding exhausted and stressed. Sierra, Kaya is really losing it. She's crying constantly. She says she can't eat, can't sleep. She just wants to apologize to you properly. Did she apologize for publicly humiliating me, Brody? I asked, my voice cool. Or just for throwing away a lot of money? He sighed. Look, she knows she messed up, okay? Big time. But she's trying to make it right. She feels terrible. Does she? I countered. Or does she feel terrible that she almost missed out on 25 grand? Brody didn't have an answer for that. He just mumbled something about her being under a lot of pressure with the baby coming and how this was all a huge misunderstanding. He was trying to mediate, to smooth things over, but it was clear he was just parroting Kaya's lines. She was painting herself as the victim, the one who had made an innocent, albeit costly mistake. Then, the calls from my parents started. First Mom, Anna, her voice laced with concern. Sierra, honey, Kaya called us. She was very upset, crying. She said there was some sort of mix-up with your gift at the shower. I took a deep breath. Mom, it wasn't a mix-up. Kaya took my gift, an envelope, didn't even look inside, and threw it in the trash in front of about 30 people. Then she announced I was too poor to buy a real present, and that I shouldn't have bothered coming. There was a stunned silence on the other end. She said, "What?" "Exactly that, Mom." Then Dad, Don, got on the extension. "Sierra, Kaya told us she thought it was an empty card, that it was a terrible accident. Dad, she made a whole speech about it. It was deliberate, and it was cruel. The only reason she's upset now is because Brody made her fish it out of the trash, and she found out that empty card contained proof of a $25,000 trust fund I set up for her daughter." Another silence. Longer this time. Then Dad said, his voice tight with anger, "That girl has a lot of nerve. A hell of a lot of nerve." Mom added, "I am so sorry you went through that, sweetheart. That's appalling behavior." Finally, someone who got it. My parents, bless them, had always had a good read on Kaya, even if they tried to keep the peace for Brody's sake. Hearing the full story, without Kaya's manipulative spin, clearly horrified them. But Kaya wasn't done. Realizing her tearful apologies and Brody's attempts at mediation weren't working, and that my parents now knew the truth, she escalated. She started a subtle, insidious smear campaign. I first heard about it from Hazel, who, bless her heart, kept an ear to the ground in circles that occasionally overlapped with Kaya's. So, I ran into Brinley at that new coffee place downtown, Hazel told me over the phone a few days later. "Oh, joy," I said. "What wisdom did she impart?" "Well," Hazel said, her voice laced with sarcasm, "apparently, according to sources close to Kaya, you're being incredibly vindictive and ungracious. That Kaya made a tiny, understandable mistake in the chaos of the shower, apologized profusely, and now you're holding this generous gift over their heads, trying to use it to control them and the baby." I felt a surge of fresh anger. She's saying, I'm the manipulative one? Yep. Painting you as the bitter, resentful sister-in-law who's trying to buy her way into the baby's life and punish poor, innocent Kaya for a simple gaffe. Hazel then forwarded me a screenshot of a vague but pointed social media post from another of Kaya's friends. It was full of hashtags like "Shush family drama," "Shush money can't buy class," and like some people. The post lamented certain family members who use gifts to create conflict and can't just be happy for others. It didn't name me, but the implication was crystal clear. "She's not just apologizing, Sierra," Hazel said, her voice grim. "She's trying to rewrite the narrative and make you the villain. She's trying to poison the well before anyone else hears your side of it." The audacity was breathtaking. First, the public humiliation, then the panicked, self-serving apologies, and now this, a deliberate attempt to slander me to save her own skin. Oh, this was not going to end well for her. Not at all. Kaya's attempt to paint me as the villain was the final straw. Her private realization of her colossal mistake wasn't enough. Her panicked, insincere apologies weren't enough. She had publicly humiliated me, and now she was trying to publicly discredit me. Fine. If she wanted a public stage, I'd give her one. Brody called again a few days later. He sounded even more worn down than before. "Sierra, please. Kaya is, well, she's not handling this well, and her dad, Vince, is hosting a small family dinner next Saturday. Just us, my parents, him. You know, a pre-baby get-together. He wants everyone to be there, to show a united front for the baby." "A united front?" I asked, my voice deceptively mild. "After Kaya has been telling anyone who'll listen that I'm a vindictive shrew trying to control her with money?" Brody winced audibly. She hasn't been saying that exactly. It's more like she's just very stressed and maybe not explaining things well." "Brody," I said, my patience wearing thin. "She's lying. She's slandering me. And you're letting her." "I'm not letting her," he protested, though his voice lacked conviction. "I told her to stop. I told her she needs to apologize to you properly, sincerely. This dinner, maybe this is a chance to clear the air. For the baby's sake, Sierra. Please? For the baby's sake. That was the magic phrase, wasn't it? The one Kaya was undoubtedly using to manipulate everyone around her. But this time, it could work to my advantage. All right, Brody, I said after a calculated pause, letting him sweat a little. For my niece's sake, I'll come. But I expect a genuine apology from Kaya, in front of everyone. Yes, of course. She will, Sierra, I promise. He sounded pathetically grateful. After I hung up, I called my parents. So, I hear we're all invited to dinner at Vince's next Saturday, I began. Yes, Brody mentioned it, Mom said, her tone wary. Are you sure you want to go, honey? After everything? I think it's important that I do, I said. And I think it's important that Vince understands the full picture. He's a businessman, isn't he? Values honesty, good investments. I'm sure he'll be very interested to hear all about my very generous and very specific gift arrangements for his future grandchild, especially the parts Kaya conveniently leaves out of her version of the story. There was a pause. Then Dad said, You have a plan, don't you? Let's just say I'm preparing a comprehensive financial report, I replied. My plan was simple, really. Kaya had dug her own grave. I was just going to provide the shovel for the final few scoops of dirt. I went to my desk and pulled out the original trust fund agreement I had printed. I made a fresh, crisp copy. The co-trustee clause was clearly stated. Major non-educational withdrawals or changes to the investment strategy require the written consent of both trustees, Kaya Weaver and Sierra Miller, until the beneficiary reaches the age of 21. That alone would be a shock to Vince, who likely assumed Kaya would have full control. But there was another clause, one I hadn't mentioned to Brody or even Hazel yet. It was something my lawyer had suggested, a standard protection for beneficiaries in situations where one trustee might prove unreliable. I'd insisted on it after years of witnessing Kaya's behavior. It was a morality clause. It stated quite clearly, should a trustee, namely Kaya Weaver, engage in behavior deemed by a court of law or by mutual agreement of the remaining trustee and the grantor's parents, Don and Anna Miller, to be financially irresponsible, morally detrimental to the well-being or upbringing of the beneficiary, or engage in public defamation or slander against the co-trustee, Sierra Miller, regarding the nature or administration of this trust, Sierra Miller shall gain sole authority over the fund's distributions and investment decisions, with the original intent of the trust for the beneficiary's welfare remaining paramount. Kaya, in her greed and panic, had likely only skimmed the initial deposit amount and the basic setup. I doubted she'd read the fine print, especially the part about slandering me. I smiled as I placed the document in a neat folder. Vince prides himself on his business acumen and his family's reputation, I murmured to myself, though I later repeated it to Hazel, who cackled with delight. Let's see how he reacts when he learns his daughter threw away a fortune, then tried to slander the benefactor, especially when her access to that fortune is explicitly tied to her good behavior and her respect for the person she publicly trashed. The dinner couldn't come soon enough. Kaya wanted a stage? She was about to get one, with her own father in the front row. Vince's house was exactly what you'd expect. Large, imposing, and filled with expensive, slightly soulless furniture. The man himself greeted us at the door. Tall, impeccably dressed, with a handshake that could crush walnuts. Kaya hovered behind him, her smile plastered on so tightly it looked painful. Brody stood beside her, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else on earth. My parents, Don and Anna, were already there, their expressions carefully neutral. Almost as soon as we were all settled in the cavernous living room with glasses of sparkling water, Kaya, of course, made a show of her mocktail. Kaya launched into her performance. Sierra, she began, her voice oozing a treacly sincerity that made my skin crawl. She even managed to conjure a few tears, which welled in her eyes as she clasped her hands together. I just want to say, from the bottom of my heart, how truly, truly sorry I am about the The misunderstanding at the shower. It was a silly, thoughtless mistake, and I've been absolutely sick about it ever since. Can you ever forgive me?" She looked imploringly at me, then shot a quick, hopeful glance at her father. This was clearly for his benefit. I met her gaze, my expression unreadable. "Thank you for your apology, Kaya," I said, my voice cool and even. "I appreciate you saying that." I didn't say I forgave her. I didn't say I accepted her apology. I just acknowledged it. The flicker of relief in her eyes was quickly replaced by a hint of uncertainty. Dinner was a tense affair. Small talk about the weather, the economy, anything but the elephant in the room. Vince, however, was not one for avoiding elephants. As dessert was served, some elaborate concoction involving spun sugar and gold leaf, he cleared his throat. "So," he said, his gaze sweeping over all of us, "Brody tells me you've made some rather generous provisions for my future grandchild, Sierra." This was my cue. Kaya tensed beside Brody. My father, Don, ever the supportive wingman, chimed in. "Yes, Vince. Sierra has been incredibly thoughtful. Perhaps she can tell you a bit about it." "Well," I began, taking a sip of water, "I was so excited about becoming an aunt that I wanted to do something special. So, I set up a trust fund for my niece with an initial deposit of $25,000. Vince raised an eyebrow, impressed. $25,000? That's a very handsome sum, Sierra. Very generous indeed. Kaya quickly jumped in. "Yes, Daddy. It was just so incredibly generous. We were overwhelmed. There was just a tiny, silly misunderstanding at the shower. I barely even saw the envelope. It was so chaotic." "Actually," I interrupted, my voice calm but firm, cutting through her babble, "it wasn't quite a tiny misunderstanding, Kaya. You took the envelope, looked right at it, rolled your eyes, and tossed it into the trash bin. Then you announced, quite loudly, that I shouldn't have bothered coming if I couldn't afford a decent present, and that my gift was embarrassing." The color drained from Kaya's face. Vince's smile faltered, his eyes narrowing slightly as he looked from me to his daughter. Brody stared fixedly at his dessert plate. My parents watched, silent, but attentive. "I see," Vince said slowly, his voice losing its earlier warmth. "And then," I continued, pulling the neatly folded document from my purse, "when you finally retrieved the trash gift, you discovered what it was. But instead of a sincere apology for the public humiliation, I started hearing from mutual acquaintances that I was being vindictive and trying to use the money to control you." I unfolded the document and placed it on the table in front of Vince. "This is a copy of the trust agreement, Vince. As you'll see, I am a co-trustee, which means any significant withdrawals or changes require my signature." Vince picked up the document, his eyes scanning the first page. Kaya looked like she was about to be physically ill. "But perhaps the most pertinent clause, given recent events," I added, my gaze flicking to Kaya, "is the morality clause. It's on page 2. It stipulates that if you, Kaya, engage in behavior detrimental to the child, or, and I quote, engage in public defamation or slander against the co-trustee, that's me, regarding the nature or administration of this trust, then I gain sole control of the fund's distributions." A stunned silence filled the room, broken only by Kaya's sharp intake of breath. Vince's face, as he read the second page, turned from surprise to thunderous. He slowly lowered the paper, his eyes, like chips of ice, fixed on his daughter. "You threw this in the trash," he said, his voice dangerously low. "A $25,000 trust with these stipulations? And then you tried to lie about it and slander your sister-in-law?" He shook his head, a look of utter disgust on his face. "You are an embarrassment, Kaya. An absolute foolhardy embarrassment. Your greed and your stupidity are astounding." Kaya crumpled, burying her face in her hands, finally letting out the choked sob she'd been holding back. Brody, who had been silent and pale throughout, finally stood up. His voice was quiet but firm. I think I need some air. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of shame and dawning realization. And Sierra, I think I owe you the apology. A real one. He turned and walked out of the room, leaving Kaya sobbing at the table, her perfect facade utterly shattered. The silence that descended after Brody walked out was thick and heavy, punctuated only by Kaya's ragged sobs. Vince stared at his daughter, his face a mask of cold fury. My parents looked uncomfortable but resolute. I simply sat there, the folder with the trust agreement still on the table, a silent testament to Kaya's spectacular self-destruction. The air crackled with unspoken recriminations. Vince finally broke the silence. "Get up, Kaya," he said, his voice devoid of any sympathy. "Stop that sniveling. You brought this entirely on yourself." He turned to me. "Sierra, I apologize for my daughter's deplorable behavior. It seems I've been far too lenient, far too indulgent. That will be changing." His eyes flicked back to Kaya, who had quieted slightly, looking up with tear-swollen eyes. "Your allowance, Kaya, is significantly reduced, effective immediately. Perhaps learning to live within actual means will teach you the value of things you so carelessly discard, and the respect you so clearly lack." Kaya opened her mouth to protest, a wail building, but Vince cut her off with a sharp gesture. "Not another word. You will go home, and you will reflect on the damage you've done. To Sierra, to Brody, to this family's reputation." The days and weeks that followed the dinner party reckoning were different. Kaya, true to Vince's word, found her lavish lifestyle abruptly curtailed. The whispers I heard through Hazel, and surprisingly, from a sheepish Brody, painted a picture of a woman forced to confront reality for the first time. Her usual haunts, the expensive boutiques and salons, saw less of her. Her superficial friends, the ones who had snickered at the baby shower, seemed to melt away once the free-flowing champagne and designer gossip dried up. She became something of a recluse, her social standing in tatters. Brody did move into the guest room. He called me a few days after the dinner. "Sierra," he started, his voice heavy with remorse, "I am so sorry. For everything. For not speaking up at the shower. For letting Kaya. For just being a coward. There's no excuse." "No, Brody, there isn't," I said. Not unkindly, but not letting him off easy either. "You let her walk all over me for years. This was just the grand finale."
"I know," he said quietly. "I've been doing a lot of thinking. About Kaya, about us, about the kind of husband and father I want to be. This whole mess has been a wake-up call. A brutal one."
Our conversations became more frequent after that. Tentative at first, then more open. He was trying, genuinely trying, to understand the depth of the hurt he'd allowed, and to rebuild some semblance of trust between us. It wasn't easy. The wounds were deep. But it was a start. Their marriage, he admitted, was hanging by a thread. Kaya was apparently alternating between sullen resentment and tearful, desperate pleas for him to fix things, still not fully grasping that she was the one who needed to do the fixing. My niece Lily was born a few weeks later, a tiny, perfect little thing. I went to the hospital, armed not with an envelope of financial documents, but with a soft, hand-knitted blanket and a heart full of love for this new little person. Brody met me at the door to Kaya's room, his smile tired but genuine. Kaya was in bed, looking pale and subdued. She mumbled a "hello," her eyes avoiding mine. There was no more fake sweetness, no more dramatic apologies, just a quiet, almost defeated air about her. I held Lily, her little fingers curling around mine, and felt a wave of emotion so powerful it almost took my breath away. This was what it had all been for. Her future. I'd kept a copy of the original letter I'd written for her, the one Kaya had tossed in the trash. I planned to give it to Lily when she was old enough to understand, a private promise between an aunt and her niece. The trust fund remained, firmly under my watchful eye, its morality clause a silent guardian. Kaya, by her own actions, had forfeited any say in its immediate administration. The money would be there for Lily, for her education, for her dreams, protected from greed and mismanagement. There was a grim satisfaction, I won't lie, in seeing Kaya face the direct consequences of her actions. The world, or at least her small gilded corner of it, finally saw her for who she truly was. I had my justice. But looking at my innocent niece, asleep in my arms, I knew the victory wasn't without its complexities. The landscape of our family had been irrevocably altered. Fractures had been exposed, some perhaps beyond repair. Kaya learned her lesson, the hard way. The world saw her for who she was. I had my justice. But looking at my innocent niece, I knew the biggest consequence wasn't just Kaya's fall, but the careful, sometimes painful path we'd all have to navigate moving forward. Some gifts, it turns out, keep on giving, and some mistakes keep on taking. The revenge was complete, but the echoes would linger for a long, long time.